section 10 now. Bhante, how does self-identity view arise? Oh wow, you know your Dharma well. You catch the drift, as they say. The teacher here is slowly guiding his students to listen to the Dharma to what level? You know? Streaming, right? Self-identity view. It makes sense here because once you talk about the five aggregates, if you identify with them, self-identity view arises. Okay? Then the Buddha replies, 10.2. Here Bhikshu, an uninstructed, or I've used the word untutored, the untutored ordinary person who is not a seer of the noble ones and is unskilled in the Dharma of the Aryas or noble ones, undisciplined in the Dharma of the Aryas or noble ones, who is not a seer of the true persons, here meaning the true practitioners, whether the layman or not, is unskilled in the Dharma of the true persons and undisciplined in the Dharma of the true persons, considers. So here, these are the 20 kinds of self-identity views of Sakaya-Ditti. Form as the self, or the self as possessing form, or form as in self, self as in form. Here is a familiar set. This is how, these are the basic wrong views about the body. That this body equals the self. My soul, myself, my spirit, whatever you call it, is the same as my body. Body equals self, body equals soul. Okay? This is the popular idea amongst the materialists, even today in Singapore. My body is my soul. So when my body dies, my soul, myself also dies with me. This is my only life. So let me live it well. So, if I see a $10 million in front of me, I'm going to run away with it, that kind of idea. Because there's no afterlife, so why do I worry? So when I die, that's it. So it's kind of idea, materialistic. Okay? Then, next one, the self as possessing form. Now you can see the details here. 40, not 40. Okay? Second line, one might wrongly regard form as self in a way the flames of a burning oil lamp is identical with the color of the flame. So the flame and its color are one and the same. So body and self are the same. Second analogy, self as possessing form is like a tree possesses shadow. The tree and the shadow. So the body, and then it, like this self overwhelms the body. Okay? It holds the body. It controls the body. Okay? And then the one form as in self. The body, there is this big self in the sky of the universe. And then we're just a spark of this. And then the last one, self as in form, this soul inside us, and then when sleeping comes out and so on. These are four ways of looking at how the idea of self or soul can be imagined, if you like. The Buddhist Buddha is not accepting of this. Here, what the Buddha rejects is that these are all permanent, unchanging aspect or entity. But it is consciousness. The consciousness is changing all the time, like electricity. So here, what the Buddha is saying, you cannot regard the form, the body, in any way having an essence that is permanent. No such thing. Right? Same thing with feelings. So this person with wrong ideas will consider feeling as the self, or the self as possessing feeling, or feeling as the self, or self as in the feeling. Same thing with perception. This person with wrong idea thinks that perception as the self, or the self as possessing perception, or perception as in the self, or self as in perception. Formations as the self, or the self as possessing formations, or formation as in the self, or self as in formation. Consciousness as the self, or the self as possessing consciousness? Consciousness as in the self, or the self as in consciousness? Now, if you cannot identify with any of these, that's the good thing. That means you don't have any idea about this thing. Now, why this is listed? Because some people out there, they will have a certain idea about self-impermanence, especially the God believers. So when they read this kind of sentences, they might be able to identify with one of them. And that's where we work from there. Read the rest of the sutta and explain. Okay? So in a sense, this is knowledge which we don't need. It's just listed here to make sure that we know that this body is impermanent, unchanging. There's no abiding essence, no fixed entity. Okay? This gives how self-identity view arises. Right? For example, someone may say, this is my body, so I can do what I like with it. But that's not the case, because we cannot exist alone. The food you take is dependent on so many other people working for it, bringing it to us, and so on. Lots of conditionality. Right? Okay, next question, 11. Bhante, how does self-identity view not arise? How to prevent this? Here Bhikshus, a little noble disciple who is a seer of the noble ones and skilled in the Dharma of the Aryas and so on, the same thing, in other words, they practice the Dharma. And the Buddha is quite simple here, it just says the opposite. Does not consider form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness as being the self or possessing the aggregate, or the aggregate is in the self, or the self as in them. Okay? Any of the four ways of speculating about the soul. In simple words, no self. So this is a reflection on anatta. Okay? Then comes we are nearing the end now, right? 12. Bhante, what is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape with regard to form? And same thing, here the keyword gratification, that means why do people like it, why are they drawn to it? What's the danger? And then how to get out of it in terms of the form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness, five everything. Then the Buddha replies, 12.2. Bhikshus, physical pleasure and mental pleasure that arise in dependence of one form, this is the gratification in regard to form. Why do people get attracted to form? Because they find pleasure in it. Right? They get caught up with the pleasure of the body. They think, wow, that is something lasting. And they get caught up with it. Form is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change. This is the danger with regard to form. Right? So people get caught up with the desire, they don't realize desire is impermanent. Right? That's the danger. What's this telling us on the positive side? The Buddha is not telling us, oh, since you are Buddhist, you should not enjoy anything about the body. Don't keep it healthy, and so on and so forth. Not at all. We do our best to keep this body healthy. We do our best not to hurt this body. But there is this impermanence. It has to come to. So in other words, we are always prepared. We know what's going to happen. So in that way, we value this life much more. That is why the first precept is to value life. Otherwise, the first precept would say, oh, the living life better. Because after all, this body is impermanent, it's dangerous. Not so, right? So we have to understand the context of this. Okay? So this impermanence is a danger which we need to be aware of. The removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust for form, this is the escape in regards to form. Another way of talking about it, take it as it is. It's not something you can always control or change. Take it as it is. Right? Again, here it doesn't mean, oh, let's say I'm bored and my eyesight is going bad, I'm going blind. So let me, if the Buddha says you're going to get attached to form, then I won't be able to study the suttas. So in other words, I also need to keep myself healthy. There's some very important sections of the Vinaya, which deals with medicine. Monks are trained to be healthy, as far as happiness can go, for the service of the Dharma, for the benefit of everyone who comes to it. So it is the middle way. Yeah? And feeling is the same thing also. Okay, so let us do this. It's the same thing. 12.3. Physical pleasure and mental pleasure that arise in dependence on feeling. This is the gratification in regards to feelings. Feelings are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change. This is the danger in regard to feelings. The removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust for feelings. This is the escape in regard to feelings. Physical pleasure and mental pleasure that arise in dependence on perception. This is the gratification in regard to perception. Perception is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change. This is the danger in regard to perception. The removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust for perception. This is the escape in regard to perception. Physical pleasure and mental pleasure that arise in dependence on formation. This is the gratification in regard to formation. Formations are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change. This is the danger in regard to formations. The removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust for formation. This is the escape in regard to formations. Physical pleasure and mental pleasure that arise in dependence on consciousness. This is the gratification in regard to consciousness. Consciousness is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change. This is the danger in regard to consciousness. The removal of desire and lust, the abandoning of desire and lust for consciousness. This is the escape in regard to consciousness. So here you have why people are drawn. People like private. What's the danger of that? How to be free? How to escape from that danger? Okay? So how we should regard the aggregates wisely. Next section, 13. The man asks another question. Bhante, how does one know, how does one see, so that in regard to this body, with its consciousness and all external signs, there is no latent tendency to I-making, mind-making, and to conceit. What is this I-making, mind-making, conceit? It's the higher level process of suffering. In fact, from these questions, you know this man is going to ask the Buddha something, for example. But we can still learn some basic things for our own happiness. I-making meaning this idea of owning things, right? Ownership. Another word for clinging. I did this, I am this, I want something. That's I-making. It's just a grammatical construct. There's no real I-ness. It's just a way of talking. Mind-making, right? So mind means a kind of clinging to something. Conceit is a measuring of oneself against others. Oh, my colleague has got a better car, better phone, better house, pretty wife, and then you also want to catch up, so to speak. So measuring yourself against others and not seeing your own goodness and uniqueness is a very common mistake, which is very difficult to get rid of, which is only the arahats totally remove conceit. And then everything repeats itself in terms of the totality formula. So the Buddha says, pictures of whatever kind of form there is, whether past, present, future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far one, one sees all forms as they really are with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. This is the famous disown me the pain formula, right? This is a very important point to remember. In my counseling, I always use this technique. This is the secret of Buddhist counseling. You got to give this medicine at the right time. Okay? Because if you give it straight away, the moment the person coming, you say this person will say, he doesn't understand. He's not ready for it. This is done towards the end of the counseling when the questions have been correctly put, all the issues are resolved, the basic issues, and then the person wants to prevent the re-arising of this kind of situation. So this one goes down to the root. So Buddhist counseling goes to the root. It's a radical cure, not just symptomatic cure. This is not mine, right? This pain is not mine. This anger is not mine. I don't want this anger. I'm not this. I'm letting go of it. So you reflect in this, all those negative emotions. This is a basic idea. Right? So let's read through this again, especially the last line. The last line is important, the operative line, but it relates to the previous lines. So here is, notice it's an extension of what was read earlier on, the same formula, 13.3. Whatever kind of feelings there are, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, one sees all feelings as they are, with right wisdom thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Whatever kind of perception there is, whether past, present, or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, one sees all perceptions as they really are, with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Whatever kind of formations there are, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, superior or inferior, far or near, one sees all formations as they really are, with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Whatever kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, one sees all consciousness as they really are, all consciousness as all consciousness as they really are, with right wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. It is when one knows thus, one sees thus, that in regard to this body, it is consciousness. And all external signs, there is no latent tendency to I-making, mind-making into conflict. So just correct the typos. 13.4, near the bottom, second last line, one sees all correct feelings to perceptions, same as the first line. Perceptions, okay? 13.5, second last line, change feelings to formations. And then 13.6, fourth line, gross or subtle. And then the second last line should be consciousness. These are polycognitive errors, meaning human errors. So latent tendencies are those unconscious habits we have that really control us deep inside our unconscious. Notice here in 15.7 and also at the start of the same section, there is the word this body with its consciousness. This body with its consciousness. Right? This refers to form, consciousness. Now then a monk comes along and asks a question. This monk has wrong view. So, for him, that is not the rose in the mind of certain mind. So it seems that form is non-self, feelings are non-self, perception is non-self, emotions are non-self, consciousness is non-self. Now so far he's understood that. But then he asks, what self then will deeds done by non-self touch? Right. So there's this wrong view. You say, okay, what action will this non-self affect? Then the Yogarista answer. He says, it is possible that some empty person here, unknowing, ignorant, with a mind dominated by craving, thinks that he might go beyond the teacher's teaching does. Just cancel out those extra gibberish. The numbers, we need to cancel. So it seems that, so if the Buddha says it's a wrong question, Now, bhikshus, you have been trained by me through questioning here and there, concerning various things. So now the Buddha is going back to simplify things for the sake of this long question. And now we go back to the famous sequence found in the Anattha-Lakkhana Sutta. 15. What do you think, bhikshus? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is what is impermanent painful or pleasurable? Painful, Bhante. Is what is impermanent, painful, and subject to change fit to be regarded as this is mine, this I am, this is myself. So this also is an explanation of the disowning. This is well known, this answer, right? Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of dialogue here. I'm going to read the Buddha line, and then you'll read the Sawaka line.
Oh, wait.
Yes?
Yeah, I don't understand. Sorry.
Which one? Question?
14.3, that is lesson 1, address the monks. Bhikshus, it is possible that some empty person here, unknowing, ignorant, with a mind dominated by craving, thinks that he might go beyond. What does this mean?
Here, what Buddha is saying is you are reading too much into it. In modern lingo, it's you're reading too much into it.
No, but the question that the monk posed is that, since you say there is no self, then whom do the deeds affect since there is no self? Is that what the monk meant?
Yes, but that's what he meant, but he didn't use the right words. He said, what self? He used the word, what self? So he still has the idea that there is some kind of self outside of the five aggregates.
Then question what?
Yeah, exactly. But the Buddha is like saying, you've not been listening to this sequence, have you? So, I mean, he's probably a bit slow, So all the, here is, I think here, this is a dramatic cue used by the storytellers.
What?
The Sutta compilers. Because the Suttas are compiled by Sutta compilers, the Sanghayana monks, And they put in the Buddha verse and then say who said what and so on, and then the context, the Sangha reciters, Sanghayana reciters. Okay?
Yeah.
So they probably added this in to dramatize that the Buddha was kind of very strong in his words, telling this monk, that's not the way to ask questions. So
it means that when he says some empty person here, unknowing, ignorant, is he saying to the monk, you are this person?
Indirectly, I would say. But the monk definitely was the vocation for the Buddha.
He's chastising the monk then?
In a sense. This is one of those controversies. Does the Buddha ever anger? So I've written something on this separately. I don't think the Buddha was angry. The Buddha is simply saying anyone who has the kind of idea that there is a self beyond the five aggregates is certainly going beyond what I teach. He's putting words into what I teach. Okay?
So he's being quick. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just trying to understand. So he's saying that he's inferring that the monks or people like
after he spoke generally.
Yeah, right. He's speaking generally. Thinks he might go beyond.
Yeah.
Meaning no more than me. Is that what you say?
No. He said don't put words into my mouth. Do not misrepresent me. Do not add in more than what I've said. Do not go beyond that. Because if you go beyond, there's nothing there.
Don't misconstrue me.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you can say that too.
Maybe kind of next with that.
Yeah. Okay. So,
I think it's just like somebody tell you an orange is a fruit.
Yeah.
And then you still ask, what kind of fruit is this orange?
Yeah, so obviously, the Buddha is stressing on fruit. Yeah. Okay.
I say,
Right. Is that clear?
What then the reply is, okay, so 14.4 is the monk's reply, is that right? Or is that the Buddha's reply? 14.4.
That is, no, that is Buddha's repeating the question.
the wrong thinking.
Yes.
Oh, so 14.4 is still the Buddha speaking?
Yeah, the Buddha said this is oral tradition where the question also is repeated.
So he
In other
says,
words, what the Buddha is saying, this question is wrongly put. It's a wrong question.
what self then will
Yeah.
be done by non-self?
The question is wrongly put.
So he's saying,
Yeah, if you say who is it, might be, it's still a wrong question, but anyway, the Buddha is answering it. So that he's answering with the non-self sequence, characteristics of the aggregates. Okay, are we ready? So I'm going to read the Buddha line, question line, and your answer line. We begin with 15.4, feelings. Alright, are you ready? Now what do you think, bhikshus? Are feelings permanent or impermanent?
Impermanent Bhante.
Is what is impermanent painful or pleasurable?
Painful Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself?
No Bhante.
What do you think, bhikshus? Is perception impermanent or impermanent?
Impermanent Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, or pleasurable?
Painful Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself?
No Bhante.
What do you think, bhikshus? Are formations permanent or impermanent?
Impermanent Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, or pleasurable?
Painful Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself?
No Bhante.
What do you think, bhikshus? Is consciousness permanent or impermanent?
Impermanent Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, or pleasurable?
Painful Bhante.
Is what is impermanent, painful, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself?
No Bhante.
So this is, the Buddha goes through the whole sequence again, just to make sure this one understands that all the aggregates, no self. And then, kind of summary, therefore means any kind of form whatsoever, whether past, present, past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all forms should be seen as they really are by right wisdom, thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So this is a repetition of the earlier phrase. So the Buddha is repeating himself because of this man, to make sure you understand. So here the totality formula is applied to answer the man's question, meaning there is no self within the five aggregates or beyond the five aggregates, other than the five aggregates. So no self. Because another may argue, okay, Buddha say the five aggregates are not non-self. But he didn't say, there must be a self outside. But again, this sutta shows no such idea. There's no self here. Okay? So now we're coming towards the end already. So once we're able to understand or accept the fact that all the five aggregates in total have no self, within or outside. Oh yes, by the way, notice the line, it says internal or external, right? So that's also can be interpreted that way. Internal or external, whether within the aggregates or outside of the aggregates. That means anywhere else.
outside aggregates.
There is no self within the aggregates or outside of the aggregates. If you look at the totality formula again, look at 16, the second line. Whether past, future, or present, that is in terms of time. Then second phrase, internal or external, notice that?
Yeah.
So we can interpret that internal meaning your own five aggregates, or the five aggregates themselves. And external, that means outside of the five aggregates, also no self.
Outside of aggregates.
This is purely philosophical, because some people say, Buddha said the five aggregates are non-self. So one possibility this person wrongly might say, outside of the five aggregates, there must be a self. That means the self has nothing to do with the five aggregates. You know what I mean? Something extra.
Something extra.
Yeah, something extra. Something beyond the five aggregates.
Like a soul.
Yeah. In other words, the soul has nothing to do with the five aggregates. The Buddha said no such thing. Something external to the five aggregates. Something other than the five aggregates. Also no self. Okay? This is what the monk is trying to say. The Buddha said, no such thing. So now we come to the conclusion. What happens when we understand all these teachings? Really understand. Well, I can tell you, despite our years of Thayana Sutta and myself translating and reading it, we have not attained that breakthrough yet to the level of Arahatu. No revulsion yet. We are not revulsed at our body, are we? We're not saying yucks, not that dramatic. But the Arahat will say, oh yeah, that's the way the body is. It's revulsed at the aggregates. Look at 17. Seeing thus monks, a well-taught noble disciple is revulsed with form, revulsed with feelings, revulsed with perception, revulsed with formation, revulsed with consciousness. In other words, they understand exactly how this body works. Let me give a simple example. We do have an idea about it, we have a vision. The Sutta says the swimming is like someone is standing in the water, not very deep but safe, and he can see land. That means you're within reach, you can either swim safely or walk through the water. Another beautiful example is this swimmer is like a thirsty person. So he managed to come to a well, and he looks, he can see water in the well, but it's not tasted yet. Right? It's a matter of time, just put the belly into the water. So once he drinks the water, the thirst is slaked, is an Arahant. So these are images to show that at least we must have a vision of the Dharma. And be guided by the vision. But you see the stars, you guide your way so you're not lost by the stars. The Dharma is like the stars, this kind of stars. Right? So here the Arahant is revulsed. But we, take for example, when you know that your arm is not strong enough to carry something, and when you carry something, wow, his shoulders can really hurt your sharp pain. And you tell us, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to carry one arm. Maybe you use two hands, something like that. So you know very well this arm is going to hurt, and you're not going to foolishly do that and hurt your arm. See, that's the closest I can think of an unbreaking idea towards revulsion. Revulsion, you don't want to be cheated again. You know this thing doesn't work. You know this thing is false. Right? So revulsion is a very strong word here. Some scholars don't like this word. They say, who uses such a terrible word? Why can't we use this illusion, gentle word? Ajahn Chah is a wonderful way of answering. He says, if you see it done, any word you use, it still smells smelly. So you might as well use the right word, Because the Arahant is different from us. It's just like this hot plate, you touch it, you get burned. You're not going to philosophize and say, let me try again, I don't know whether I get burned or not. You'll say, no, I'm not going to touch it. That's the meaning of revulsion towards the aggregates, towards the Arahant.
I see this word quite often in some of the suttas, but as you said, it appears to be a very strong word.
Yes.
So when I say I'm revulsed with something, then I hate it.
Repel.
Repel.
Exactly.
So I thought words like maybe disconnected, which means you are separate from it.
Well, you have two ways of this. Either you choose another word, or you can redefine it.
You got to the same thing.
Because in this case, I don't know, in the law court, you've got to follow the word, Here, spirituality, you can redefine it. After all, we're the ones who over time will define the terms. There's no hatred. It's just that I will never touch it again. The feeling is so strong because you know it's going to be very painful.
So that one will avoid it.
Exactly. So in that sense, revulse.
Very strong.
Yeah, definitely the strength is very important. This person will never want to get back because that's the Arahant's mind.
What about aging and sickness?
What about aging and sickness?
Is it revulsive?
Well, it depends whether you're an Arahant or not. We've got to look at it wisely. We say, well, that's the nature of life. We do fall sick. But for us, we reflect on the goodness that we have experienced, and then we try to get well as far as we can, and do something useful. The Jains are different. The Jains, they probably starve themselves to death, and they regard it as holy. They call it Salekkhana, religious suicide, which the Buddha disallowed. The Buddha says against the rules. Of course, once the monk has The skill itself is beyond the rules, so it is just complicated. But the spirit of the law is such that if the man is alive, he should not do it. Because he is useful to us, especially a wise man. So if all the wise men became wise and they start committing suicide, well, they're the stupid ones. But you serious trouble. You know? Right? Okay, let's finish up a few more lines. So now the sutta goes on. 18, being revolved, last fades away. So you can see here it is a play on words in the good sense. Last is a powerful way of attracting something. So you need a very powerful word that pushes away, that has the action of pushing away. So once it's reversed, last is pushed away, last fades away. Through the fading away of last, or another word is dispassion, the mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. Now this line is interesting because the knowledge is after the fact. Maybe you're meditating one day and then you attain straight meaning, or even at the moment, maybe you might not know it because you're so blissful, you know. And then after a few days you come out of your bliss and say, wow, I got it, you know. Okay, so you look back. The knowledge comes after the fact. Okay? He knows birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, done what has to be done, or what had to be done. There is no more of this state of being. That's the formula for Dharma. The Blessed One said this, and once you see this line, this teaching finished already. The monks, joyful at heart, approve of the Blessed One's word. Now, while this discourse was being spoken, the mind of 60 monks, these were the students of that one, the questioner, through not clinging, were liberated from the influxes. And then you have a verse, not found in all the traditions, but this verse is found in the Burmese version and the European version and the Sinhalese version. Only the so not one in all the versions, certain about it. 2 about the aggregates, whether they can be the same, about destination and cause, 2 about identity, 1 each on gratification, and the 1 with consciousness. These are the 10 questions that the monks came to ask. So in a sense, this sutta can be said to be the 10 questions. So this last verse is kind of a mnemonic used by the Sangha, the council monks, to remember the questions. So the sutta ends there. All right, any questions?
Page 173.
173. 6.2. Yeah, 6.2. Page 173.
That maybe it's not the same.
Numbering, right?
6.2 level.
Yeah. The 6
is neither what is it then?
Picture thing is neither the same as these 5 grades of thinking, nor is different.
Oh yeah, we didn't explain that.
Actually, I did.
You did? Okay.
Okay, put it this way. Take the body, for example, okay? The question is the body itself clinging, or is the clinging separate from the body? Okay? Now here, the body we're talking about conscious body. Remember, conscious body, right? So, this one is asking, okay, we have a conscious body, so is this body that is clinging, or the clinging is something else, the body is something else? These are philosophical questions, right? So the Buddha said, both are right, okay? Or both don't apply, depends how you look at it. For example, let's say, if you don't have this body, there will be no clinging, right? On the other hand, you can still have clinging, and but you can't. The body must be there. So it seems as if they seem to be separate. Okay? Yet they are not the same, because if they are the same, then you can never let go of the clinging. You can never be an arhat. So Because you have a body and you are not wise, clinging is there. You have a body, if you are wise, clinging is not there.
Clinging is in the mind, not the body.
Exactly. Yeah, it's in the mind. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. So, a simple way of understanding is, if you are not wise, then the clinging is there in the body. Because you cling to it, see? Because the body is there, you have this body, I am this body, you have this self-identity view, so you cling to it. It's no different. You are there clinging yourself, see? Right? On the other hand, in case the other hand, there's no clinging, so you can't say it's there. You're not connected. So remember earlier I said that because they are separate, therefore salvation, awakening is possible. You can push away clinging.
Yeah, but this line is not saying the same, because it says neither. It's not saying yes and yes.
Yeah, it says
It's not no and no.
okay, it's not the aggregate, and the same thing, it is also not different from the aggregate. That means it's the same as the aggregate, right? Yeah, this is a double negative, it's quite tricky. So here, I think we can reflect it in the same way. What Buddha is trying to say is the interconnection between the clinging and the aggregate. You cannot separate them. In the case of the unawakened person, at the same time, in the awakened person, they are separated. Okay, I think that's the closest I can answer. The negative language is quite tough. You are not philosophizing it. Someone who knows logic will be able to explain this better. But the bottom line would be what I've said just now. When you reflect, that you cannot identify the two together, and yet you cannot really separate them. Okay? Any question?
So simply, I mean, instead of putting in this double negative form, the meaning is, in an awakened person, there is no clinging. In an unawakened person, there is clinging.
Yes, that's the
This is in simple English.
simple. Correct.
That's the essence of the meaning. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, well, let us now spend a short while reflecting on this very wonderful occasion, studying the Mahapadama Sutta, which helps us to understand on a deeper level, more personal level, the nature of the five predicates. We are made out of these parts: form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness, and they all work together. They are impermanent without any abiding entity, and there is no self in them. So they work together as aggregates, as conditioned parts. Once we reflect in this way, we begin to see how we interconnect within ourselves and also with others. And in this interconnection, there is impermanence, there is unsatisfactoriness, there is non-self. And this is our chance to understand day by day, every moment as we practice, how we connect with the aggregates, with other people, other beings. And we begin to see the impermanence within ourselves. That is how we cultivate wisdom, bit by bit. Reflecting in this way is very good mental harmony. For all such to come out in our minds, to refocus in this life itself. May we be at peace and be happy, even here and now. But all is to come with life. Our faith in the three jewels, our practice of the precepts, our generosity, our dedication to Buddhist work, and many other good deeds. May we attain spiritual liberation in this trip winning, in this life itself. In this moment of peace, let us send our loving kindness, spread our loving kindness to all the beings in this temple, this area, and also share our loving kindness with all the people who work here, all the teachers who give teachings, and also to all beings. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.